So such an interesting talk. We had plenty of questions. So we'll keep moving along here. Our next speaker is Paul Coughlin. Paul is the Habitat Program Administrator with Game Fish and Parks. He began his career with Game Fish and Parks as a private land habitat biologist working on Lake Thompson Watershed Project. He later relocated to Pierre to oversee the agency's private lands and public lands habitat programs. He received both his BS and MS degrees in wildlife and fisheries science from the South Dakota State University in Brookings. And Paul, I purposely left out the dates you got those degrees just to
Much appreciated, Casey.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, hand it off to you.
All right. Yeah. Get this running here for you. All right, can we see the screen there?
Yep, we can see it. You're not quite in the presentation mode though.
Oh, okay. Apologize for that.
That's all right.
Yeah. Of course, we were going to have technical difficulties when I started.
Let's see. Did you click on that bottom right? Yeah, bottom right hand corner. You said the very bottom right next to like that zoom function there.
Yeah, I'm
okay.
Paul, do you have two screens going?
I do.
It looks like maybe you're sharing the wrong screen. If you close your screen share and then go back and share the screen that it was projecting onto, you should be okay. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob.
Hey, yeah, thank you for the technical help there. Much appreciated. Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation to speak with the chapter today. The topic, my topic isn't quite with the topic or the session title of pandemic, effects of the pandemic, other than perhaps it's highly related to what Heather talked about in regards to hunting and fishing license sales, and a little bit about what Scott talked about with folks being outdoors and recreating and what that has meant for license sales for our agency, in particular, given this new opportunity that we have that was created with the recently initiated habitat stamp. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about this. This started out the habitat stamp last year in the 2020 legislative session, and it was brought about through the efforts of Senator V.J. Smith out of Brookings, and it was introduced as Senate Bill 75, and essentially what it was is it was to establish a habitat stamp where anyone who bought a hunting and fishing license would be required to buy one of these habitat stamps, and that this money would be dedicated specifically to habitat and hunting and fishing access opportunities in South Dakota. V.J. Smith, Senator Smith, tells us an important story about how a friend of his in Brookings had often made the comment how they would go to Minnesota to hunt pheasants rather than in South Dakota, and VJ kind of used this as the motivation to say, well, why is that? Why do we not have what we need on our public lands in South Dakota, to provide these opportunities? And so that was sort of the impetus of his wanting to get this habitat stamp established. So it was introduced, and it was solidly supported by many in the legislature, and in fact passed solidly through the legislative session through committees and on both the House and the Senate side. Interestingly enough, though, it was the the original bill was actually vetoed by the governor for a minor technicality. And then during the special session, or when the session reconvened to consider vetoes, it again passed overwhelmingly with only a few dissenting votes. And there's always going to be some haters out there. But in general, what the habitat stamp does is it's a fee, it's a license fee, if you will, for residents and non-residents, $10 and $25 respectively. And of course, there's going to be exceptions to that, and you can see what those are. That they didn't want to necessarily require youth hunters and anglers to purchase the stamp. There were things like one-day hunting and fishing licenses, and hunt for habitat and other sort of specific licenses that they felt the habitat stamp didn't necessarily fit with, and so they did utilize those exceptions to that rule, or to the bill. As far as spending, the bill was very specific in how it laid out what the revenue generated by the habitat stamp could be spent on. All fees were, of course, collected for when people purchased hunting and fishing licenses, and they were, the bill again even drilled down further in that it required that, if you bought a fishing license, that money would be specifically used for aquatic habitat and access projects. And likewise, if you were someone who bought a hunting license or a trapping license, those dollars would be directed specifically towards terrestrial habitat and public access programs. So the legislation did spell out specifically how the money was to be used. And GFP is granted, authority by the legislature, to collect license money and use it for department purposes. And the thing about the habitat stamp is when you drill down into, saying it's, department, you're going to collect this amount and it's going to be dedicated to these sort of uses. That's what it is. What it sounds like. It's dedicated funding, and it's very specific to certain expenditures. So on one hand, that's good that there's opportunity to develop these funds to use specifically for important things like habitat and access. On the other hand, as an agency, sometimes looking at dedicated funding, when the legislature gives you the authority to collect fees and use them, but putting specific dedicated uses on it, sometimes that can be a problematic. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the habitat stamp funds, what we're seeing is that, habitat and access are a huge priority for our agency and our Game Fish and Parks Commission. And by having these funds specifically dedicated towards those uses via the legislation is not problematic whatsoever for our agency. Of course, the legislation was very specific in that it could not be used to purchase land. I think that's something that is a very sensitive topic, and particularly sensitive with the legislature. And so, it was just clearly stated they're not, we as an agency could not use it to buy land. And the other part of this is that, just to ensure that that we as an agency are doing the right thing with this, with these funds, the legislation required that we also deliver an annual itemized expenditure report to the Government Operations and Audit Committee. So as an agency, the legislation passes, we start collecting this. What we have to do as an agency is prepare for this, of course. The habitat stamp, when it was being talked about in the legislature, it was projected that it would generate potentially $5 million a year for the agency, and so if the agency is going to be the recipient of that sort of revenue, we have to go through some planning. and we have to figure out how are we going to do the right thing with this, and how are we going to get it done. And so we went through several processes to do this. If you think about it, when the bill passed last year in the legislative session and then was eventually signed after being vetoed, the law actually went into effect July 1st. And so we had a very short window from, what was March of 2020 until July 1st of 2020 in order to really get our poop in a group. And one of probably the bigger things with regards to that is just setting up our accounting and licensing system to handle selling that habitat stamp when people applied for a license or bought a license online. And the system had to be ready to go at midnight on July 1st. And our licensing staff did an absolutely wonderful job of doing that. And we were able to basically hit the on button on July 1st and without any hiccups, at least that I was aware of, or that the public was aware of. The other part of that is that we had to develop an internal process of how we go about spending the revenue. This has to do with everything from developing projects that we would fund with these revenues, how to track the money that's going into these various projects, and how to report on our successes, whether that's to the public, showing licensed buyers, here's what we're doing with this money, here's the important projects that we're working on, or going back to providing that accounting and report, that annual report to Government Operations and Audit Committee. So there was a lot of things that went into that, and we went through a couple of lean strategies or lean processes here with some of the key staff in order to map out how we were going to accomplish all of this. So again, like I say, in July 1st, 2020, it went live. And I just thought I'd throw this up there to show you exactly how 2020, was 6 months of license sales equated with regards to habitat stamp. You can see, how much, how many residents, non-residents, kind of that breakdown, hunting and fishing. One of the important points here is that if you look at that hunting and fishing, if somebody buys, for example, that combo license, that hunting and fishing license, those revenues are split between aquatic and terrestrial habitat projects. So, this is just again a summary. You can see that bottom line. Folks even had the opportunity to if they wanted to just contribute to habitat conservation in South Dakota by buying a habitat stamp alone. So it went live. We started collecting money, and as the old saying goes, okay, you finally caught. You're the dog chasing the car, and you finally caught it. Now what are you going to do? And so we, as an agency, had looked to, well, what are we going to do, to improve habitat and access opportunities across South Dakota, utilizing these habitat stamp funds. We looked at things on our game production areas, and we had big projects. We had smaller projects, big projects like, some of these small impoundments that provide habitat and hunting and fishing opportunity. One of the pictures there shows one of these small impoundments that obviously is in need of a little attention. We have access to game production areas, and we have, just like any other entity out there with roads on their property, we have issues where we have to continually address problems that occur with access to and across game production areas. And then we have a lot of little things. The idea is to develop habitat, and that's everything from talking about trees or food plots or grass plantings, invasive species management, all that sort of thing. And so as an agency, we had to kind of quickly come together and decide where are their priorities for spending this money that's now coming in. So part of that, determining what and where, specifically when it comes to our game production areas, that what and where we were going to spend this money, we back in 2018, our agency, with the help of our regional habitat staff, conducted what we call a GPA habitat and access assessment. And through this process, our habitat teams in the regions identified, really, they looked at every one of our 720 plus game production areas and all the acres, and knowing that our emphasis, of course, is on game species, they identified basically $19 million worth of habitat needs on our own game production areas. And again, these are things that that they wanted to do in order to improve game production areas for wildlife production, wildlife conservation, as well as public use opportunities, whether that's hunting, fishing, whatever it might be. And so through that assessment process, we basically had a working list on which to start spending this habitat stamp money. Just a couple of things from that list, our staff had identified opportunities to develop over 20,000 acres of native grass seedings. We have things, restoration projects, we have new seedings that we can do on game production areas, but 20,000 acres of opportunity for improving nesting cover and hunting habitat existed on GPAs. They identified opportunity for 1,500 acres of pollinator plots on our game production areas. We had 160 miles of roads and trails that needed to be addressed with regards to making sure they were safe and usable for the public to get to and across game production areas. So again, we had a very solid working list on which to work off of.
Hey, Paul, just give you a heads up, you have about 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So what we did is we focused a lot on things that we could really show high impact and quick success with, given the short time flight. And so in 2020, our regional habitat staff came together and put on the ground a lot of different habitat developments, and this is just a list that of some of those things that we did in 2020. Again, just a half year, you had 6 months to get all this done. And so we did a tremendous job of our crews did a tremendous job of getting these habitat developments on the ground and in ways that are meaningful. 2021 and beyond, we're just going to keep maintaining that same effort at addressing those needs identified in that GPA assessment, continue to do some long-term planning, looking for new opportunities and beyond. One of the things I'll talk to right now is just part of the habitat stamp was also dedicated towards hunting access. And so one of the decisions the department made was to utilize these habitat stamp funds to finish out our conservation reserve enhancement program. Through that program, we had originally had 100,000 acres authorized. We stopped short of meeting that goal, but with the habitat stamp money now available, we're now able to start enrolling additional acres into CREP to get us to that 100,000 acres in James River watershed. A commitment of about $1.5 million a year for the next 10 or 15 years. So the habitat stamp has really opened up a lot of opportunities for us, and that's where we're going to be headed in the future. And with that, and being short on time, I'm going to just kind of stop right there and see if there's any questions for anybody.
Thanks, Paul. We've got time for probably one quick question. If anybody has one, feel free to just unmute yourself and spout it out.
Hey, Paul, this is Randy Meidinger. I just had a question. When the funds are accumulated, is there a time span which they have to be spent, or can they be accumulated for a number of years and built up?
Yeah, that's a good question, Randy. And actually, as much as they can be, the funds will, when they're collected, they do go into our larger game fund as an agency, and where they sit. And it's the sort of thing that we don't necessarily have to spend all of those funds every year, but we are going to try our best to to show that there was the need, of course, and try to expend as much of those monies as we can throughout the year. But yeah, if we don't spend it by the end of the calendar year, they don't necessarily go away.
Just real quick, we had a question typed in from Bruce, if you can give a quick answer to it. He's wondering if there's been any consideration to establish dedicated revenue to support non-game conservation via sales of wildlife stamps.
Yeah, that's maybe a little out of my wheelhouse. I think one of the, just on a much related note, Bruce, one of the things that was asked about the habitat stamp when it was being debated in the legislature was whether or not this money could be used as match towards something like RAWA. If RAWA were to come, Restore America's Wildlife Act, if that were to become, law and revenue would start pouring in from that, habitat stamp money could be used as part of the non-federal match requirement for RAWA projects, if of course those projects meet the needs of those identified species, as well as the requirements of the habitat stamp legislation. So there is a tie there to some of the non-game and wildlife diversity programs as well.